I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we are speaking with author Stephen Locke about his wonderful book. It is called Outrageous Fortune: Meditations on Living Through a Pandemic. It offers a poignant reflection on navigating through troubled times. The global pandemic has brought on a unique set of challenges that have left many of us feeling fearful, uncertain, and disconnected. In his book, he explains and explores the emotional upheaval of our struggle and offers some helpful advice. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
My pleasure to be here, Logan, and I'm glad that we got together. And I want to thank City of Books for making this happen. So.
Absolutely. They did a great job. Glad to have you in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers at home to support writers like Stephen by subscribing to our channel. Stephen, your book is fantastic. It was born out of hardship, of course, but that's sometimes when we find our best inspiration. Tell the folks at home a little bit about Outrageous Fortune.
Well, it's a book that grew out of my frustration as a pastor. I was pastoring a church at the beginning of the pandemic, and I found myself being disconnected from the church, just like everybody in the church, not being able to show up in person and worship together. Everything was done on Zoom. So I just decided, I go, how can I help my congregation? And the only thing I knew how to do was to write. Mm. And that's how these were birthed. And I wrote one a week for about a year.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, they're very helpful for people going through any kind of hardship, really, because the disconnect and the loneliness and the bleakness of the pandemic touches us at different times of our life, unfortunately, right?
Yes, it does. And I found that in myself and in the church, this disconnection, this isolation, as I propose in the book, is something that we have to kind of look at and absorb in ourselves before we can really sort of massage it spiritually, emotionally. And so a lot of these things I had to, instead of putting the brakes on and saying, don't come into my life, it's like, I'm going to take this in and live with it a while. And I think from that experience, I sort of learned what people were going through, because of what I was going through. And I hope that the book actually helps people birth a new kind of understanding about themselves and about their world. So that's part of what I was trying to do.
Yeah. And you succeeded for sure. I mean, we learned from the pandemic that our lives can change on a dime. That, the president can come on and tell us that we're closing down for 2 weeks, which becomes a couple of months, which becomes a year. And what you knew as normal is no longer normal. And what was held dear to you, something like going to church, going to services or mass or whatever it is, or synagogue, is no longer an option. You're not allowed to go by law. It's crazy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. What was your take on the fact that your church was closed down? You didn't have a choice.
Well, first I had to deal with my congregation's anger, because a lot of them just said, hey, look, why do we have to do this? Let's separate ourselves from the government's control of worshiping. And I had to fight long and hard to get them to understand that to be separate at this time is actually helping us save lives and also to not live in fear. So anyway, so I know it was a tough time. Yeah. And still is going to be tough in some respects.
Absolutely. Well, it's changed life for better and for the worst. I mean, I think a lot of people have
Yes.
found freedom in the
Yes.
post-pandemic. Do you agree, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
They, yeah. And but that freedom comes with another theme that I've developed in the book, and that's responsibility
Mhm.
of how we go about doing things, making sure that we test ourselves when we don't feel good, all those kinds of things to make people feel and to provide a safety net. So this freedom, as you put it, is available and experienced.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
With great fortune sometimes comes great responsibility, to
Yes.
paraphrase, right? Um,
Yeah.
Tell me what it was like for you writing these meditations. Was it helpful to you in getting through the angst and anxiety of being, you know, isolated like the
Yeah.
rest of us?
It was very helpful. I looked forward to them every week. You know, I think it was either Monday or Tuesday of every week. I sat down, empty computer, and just started to write. And I found these points inside myself becoming clearer about my fear and about my isolation. And it was helpful to me to absorb those things, to massage them.
Mhm.
You can't, you know, I often say it's like once you try to define your emotions, you sort of lose it. You have to feel it in some way. And that's what these devotions helped me do, is to feel connected with others in my church and my friends as well.
Were you sharing these meditations week by week with your congregation?
Yes, I did.
And
I
what was the reaction?
Well, some of them said, you know, you use too many philosophers.
There's always a critic, right?
There's
Yeah.
always a critic.
Yeah.
Uh, but for the most part, most of them, I would say, appreciated it because one woman came up to me and said, uh, an 80-year-old, just a dear of a human being, she came up and said, I think I know you better.
Mhm.
And that just was very meaningful to me,
Yeah.
that they got me, you know,
Mhm.
they understand what it is I'm trying to do, and they appreciate it. So
Absolutely.
favorable responses, but you know, as you say, there's always a critic out there.
Exactly, exactly. And for some reason, you'll have 99 great responses, and that one person who says
Yeah,
something negative sticks in our claw, and we remember it forever.
yeah,
But that's just
right.
human nature. Tell the folks at home why you call the book Outrageous Fortune.
Well, as you know, it's from Hamlet, and
Mhm.
and Shakespeare has a way of capturing, to me, this kind of tragic understanding of life, but with comedy and compassion. And that that little part of Hamlet just spoke to me. You know, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Should I really go after these, or just go against them and just forget it all and end my life? And there were there were a lot of people that I talked to, strangely enough. I mean, I that had this feeling of doom constantly. And so outrageous fortune sounded like a good title to me. Like, you know, uh, we have all of this stuff, all of this wonderful connection, all these people, all this world, this beautiful world, and yet we still uh, have these tragic moments
Yeah.
that that propel us into darkness and so forth. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the reason I did it. And I was thinking of using a Lear quote, because Lear has a great deal of compassion toward the end of his life. And I wanted to seep that in, but I couldn't work it in. So I just left it.
Outrageous Fortune worked perfectly, and I think it's a perfect title, and it really catches your attention, which is important too when writing a book, because you can have the best things or the best words or the best meditations or devotions in the world in it, but you got to get people to read it. And this is a book that is worth opening, folks, and worth reading and thinking about and reflecting on, because it will help renew your faith in God, and I think it'll renew your faith in yourself as well. Tell us a little bit about your congregation and your work as a pastor.
Well, I retired a year ago, 40 years of being a pastor. And congregations of all types, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, you name it. The congregations, they want to be there and they want to be connected, but there is also an explosive reality about community. and these things need to be massaged. They need to be have caretakers over them, like myself, pastors. And it seems like my whole 40 years was like holding on to people's hand and saying, let's go through this together. And that's what a pastor, I think, ultimately is guiding people through a very rough time. And that's where I learned to write to disgruntled people and write to people who needed help. So it really honed my skills as a person and as a writer.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, the spoken word, for me as a writer also, I spoke before I wrote. And that, I think, makes you a very conversational writer and a writer who connects with people, not to blow my own horn, but to just speak about the concept of being a speaker first in general. The name of the book is Outrageous Fortune, Meditations on Living Through a Pandemic. It was written by Stephen W. Locke during the pandemic. Each week he would write a devotion or a meditation, and they are wonderful, they're inspirational, and it is not just limited to the pandemic. There are dark periods and dark clouds in our lives all the time, and if you go through a death, if you go through any type of loss, if you just need to renew your relationship with God again, this is the perfect book for that. We're about to close, but before we go, let me let you have the last word there, Stephen.
Well, when, as a writer, you're a writer, sometimes you don't know what you're writing. And then afterwards, I just buried myself in all of these 50 meditations, and I saw some themes grow up that I didn't know I was writing on. I didn't intentionally do that. And the themes are fear and anger, compassion, community, isolation, hope and faith, and responsibility. And I think that community and responsibility are what people are going to receive from this book, is the importance of those realities in our life, even though we do feel isolated and so forth. But I think those are the foundations that build on these meditations, is those two themes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can see that for sure. And I think that's important for people to realize that they are part of a community, that they're not alone. And even when they're just talking via Zoom, they can connect, just like you found a way to connect with your faithful during the pandemic. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, Logan. I appreciate it very much. I'm honored.
Pleasure is all mine. The honor is mine, sir. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.